You're watching SBA Today. With all the latest news, stories, and advice, here are your hosts, Paul Long and Tanya Mazurek.
Welcome to SBA Today for the week of April 7th. I am Paul.
And I'm Tanya. And today's show is brought to you by Res Title, because we all know how important title work is when you're doing a CRE. Anyway, so check them out at res-title.com. Let's make sure I get that correct.
Dashes make differences. Yep, very good.
That's awesome. I like that. I'm going to use it.
Perfect. Well, hey, let's get into the top stories. But before we do, we have a special guest that will be on a little bit later on. I'm very excited to have. Oh, I won't say. Okay, it'll be a secret. Secret squirrel moment. Okay. But first, our top stories. Yeah. I know that all of us as SBA lenders, we're so excited to start generating student loans because we have nothing else to do. And I'm just kind of playing because I know no one will do that. But the good news, SBA lenders, is Republicans are not excited about putting student loans under the SBA. Now, many Republicans are worried about the size of the debt and the staffing needed to manage the complex system of services, borrowers, and loan applications. Okay, stop for a second here on this. We are concerned about staffing. You just laid tons of people off. Okay, sorry. Anyway, and with there's 43 million borrowers. Transferring this work may be one of the most challenging hurdles for unwinding the agency Trump has pledged to close. I
already know what you're saying on this, but here's the flip side of it too, because Loeffler also stated this, and she likes the idea. I get putting the parts into play, but when you think about it too, who should be over lending? Who should be over? Yeah. These students that come in that are getting these loans, they're not being told what the heck this means really in the reality of it. And then I think it's hurting them down the road, right, with the Department of Education, because they're not lenders. They don't think from the financial side. So, somebody that is thinking from that side, maybe that would save some people from some of the things that they get themselves into, and or at least be a little more transparent as to what it means when you're taking on this debt.
But we need staffing to do it. Stop laying people off.
I am not saying that they have created it correctly.
Okay, got it.
This, right? Yes, they absolutely need staffing. I mean, I'm saying the end game of I could see how that could make some sense. I'm not saying that it can be done right now because.
No, I know. Sorry, hot topic. Hot topic.
Let's go for it. We're going to duke it out behind the scenes. Y'all have no idea.
Yep.
Anyway. Yeah. So, yes. And moving on to the next one, when it comes to Social Security is rife with fraud. Well, yeah, it is. And there's so many other things. And so Loeffler had, I don't know if we're going to put that on the background or not, but was on Fox Business News and was talking a lot about that, but she also was talking about Liberation Day. Liberation Day. That was April 2nd. Now is Liberation Day. So we've got, what is it?
Do we get a day off?
Versus April Fool's Day, and it goes straight into Liberation Day.
Do we have a video?
Yeah, to just throw in the back. I think that's what we were talking about.
I thought it was interesting. Yeah. I thought it was interesting because she was really going into about the tariffs and the video really.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was going to talk about actually a little bit. It's like, well, first, Liberation Day. I mean, that's the whole thing. I keep thinking about Will Smith when it comes to that. But she states it's the single greatest salvation. It's the single greatest salvation. I thought that was, very strong wording. $4 trillion in investments into the U.S. in the past 4 months of President Trump's presidency, and trading partners now coming to the table to negotiate. This is from Ms. Loeffler, right? $600 billion from Saudi Arabia alone, right? And I don't know, with a lot of that, we're going to have to go through some dark guys before we see the light. We're in the dark, right? Ms. Loeffler goes on to say that 99% of American manufacturers are small businesses, and they've been gutted by cheap goods and cheap labor. She states this will strengthen. This will. Oh, come on. I can't say that I haven't ordered from them. Anyway. She states this will strengthen small business because during COVID pandemic, there was a breakdown in the supply chains, which is true. We all know this, right? So she was talking about, okay, how did she say this? Because it's the funniest thing. When an economy can't make its own screws, nuts, and bolts. Now, I was renovating during this time frame. I had bought a new townhome and was renovating the whole main floor. The entire kitchen was gone, and I had a cabinet maker that was going to make my cabinets. Guess what? The cabinet maker didn't have 2-inch screws because they ordered from, and everything was, the supply was backed up. Anyway, he luckily, like some businesses, he luckily had reserves and was able to order like just a very large amount to take care of him. Oh, sorry about that. But many of the small businesses out there didn't have those reserves, and so they weren't able to do that. So it was a really big deal. Anyway, Ms. Loeffler met with 100 manufacturers over the past little bit with her manufacturing roadshow. She says that the vast majority of them, 99%, are in favor of the tariffs. She went on to speak on taking over student loans. We've already talked about that. But at the end, she's talking about DOGE, and she states, we have to make sure that we are operating like a business, being accountable to taxpayers. Now, I don't know about you, Paul, but I 100% agree with that.
I do too. Yeah. I think, we do need to kind of run as a business, but the same point too, I always get pushback when I say that to people too, is we should run it as a business. Well, the government is not set up necessarily to be a business because it's there to kind of help through things. Sometimes it's kind of a version of non-for-profit, right? Because it all depends. But I think in the SBA factor, we need to make sure that we, again, remain zero subsidy and that we do run it as a business as much as possible to at least break even. That's the key.
Break even would be nice. I think we're all going to have to go. I mean, there's going to be dark days before we get to the light. We all know this, right? And I think we're probably in them. And who knows what's coming down the line, because we've all seen the markets up and down and up and down. Anyway.
I still, Tanya, need to work on this, and I haven't had time to work on that, but I want to put together a Trump bingo card and an SBA Trump bingo card. And I want to have it where, just random stuff throughout, and let's see who gets a bingo from some of this stuff.
Dude, I think
only just started.
I think you totally should.
Again, I think we're going to get a new SOP here soon. That'll be interesting. There's a lot of change coming. So,
Every time somebody says SOP these days, I think about an interview I had, Paul, that the person sat down and said, I can run the SBA division from where he was coming from. And I was like, really, what do you do, or what do you know as far as the SOP? And he states, what's an SOP?
Ooh, I've actually had that in a job interview before. And I go, declined. It happens. Yeah. It's just it's jaw dropping. If you don't know what that is, you don't eat and breathe this stuff. So
exactly. Oh, look at Susie Granger states she wants one of those bingo cards.
I'm sure she does.
You gotta have the whole bingo thing going, man.
That's awesome, right. That's right.
Anyway, all right.
Well, hey, we are.
Here we go.
Yeah. Well, so we are joined today by the Valuator in Chief. I made up that title for you, Mr. Ryan Hutchins with Peak Business Valuations. If you have not been doing business with him, what is wrong with you? Because he is a phenomenal partner, and I want to welcome you to the show, Ryan.
Oh, your energy, you and Tanya together are phenomenal. I don't know if I can match it, so I'm going to try my hardest.
Oh, come on, you can do it. I mean, you're going to talk about valuations. I mean, the valuations, what could possibly be sexier or more exciting than that?
Oh, well, I'm actually excited about student loans rolling up under the SBA, because then it's like, oh, do we get to value the future income of these people? To see whether or not their degree is actually worth it?
Oh, Lord.
I have opinions. I want to be a valuator. Well, go, jump into Ryan. What's kind of going on in the business valuation space right now? What are some things you want to share with our audience? Because I mean, there's always something going on.
Yeah, the two hot topics that keep kind of bouncing around with us talking to lenders, but also on LinkedIn, is around net working capital and QoEs, or I should say quality of earnings, and why they're more of a hot topic now than they were just 2 years ago. Yeah. And so we could go in either direction, talking about QoEs or net working capital and why it's important.
Can you give us a Reader's Digest version of both?
Oh, I could do that. Yes. So why? We'll start with net working capital because I have a conversation with a lender almost every day about it. Ultimately, as a business valuation firm, we are looking at the going concern value of a company. And so when you're looking at the cash flow, that cash flow needs working capital in order to continue into perpetuity. Yep. And so when a seller is wanting to pull all the assets out of the business and is not willing to leave any form of working capital in the company, it kind of puts the company in a bind, and it requires the bank to extend a line of credit. And ultimately, a line of credit shows up on the balance sheet as a short-term liability. And if the borrower kind of draws down that line of credit, it adds cash. And ultimately, it's a net zero. So they're kind of in the same, like it doesn't improve their net working capital position. And so ultimately, for all buyers that we're talking to, it's important to negotiate on a normal level of working capital to be left in that business in order to kind of continue its current operations and revenue generating ability.
Now, what would you say when they're negotiating that? How, I get that you're saying like the typical level and all that, but let's say the seller doesn't want to keep that. What is a good negotiating tool for that buyer potentially?
Oh, that is good. So an easy way to look at it is just to look at all the expenses, like from a simplicity standpoint, all the expenses incurred by a company, and just divide that by 365 days and saying, okay, this is how much in expenses I'm incurring on a daily basis. And most industries, like different industries, have varying rules of thumb depending on how easy it is to turn AR or any service into cash. And so if you're able to cover like a month's worth of expenses, or depending on the business model, like a restaurant, maybe 2 weeks worth, like you want to make sure that that working capital is left in the business to cover those expenses. Because otherwise, day one, if there's no working capital left in, you're having to come up with that yourself as the buyer. And so it's more investment on your end. And so your return on investment kind of shrinks.
You know what I love about that too, because we all know that borrowers come to us and then they want the working capital and they think the working capital is going to, make up for that at the end. But think about this, right? It takes a second to get that working capital because then banks want the invoices and all the different things that come along with that working capital. So if they've already got the money in there because they've negotiated this with the seller, they're sitting way more pretty. And I just like what you said. It's great. Borrowers, listen up, and lenders listen up. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
So Reader Digest, I think we covered net working capital.
Yeah,
so quality of earnings, which is a fascinating topic because banks underwrite under tax returns. And ultimately, tax returns are still kind of a gold standard. For us, there's in valuation, there's a level of sophistication where if it's audited financials, we would take audited financials every day.
Yep.
Because everyone knows that tax returns, it's just a game to minimize taxes. And it's not so much showing the economics of what the company should be doing from a cash flow perspective. And so that's where quality of earnings has been coming into play more so. Is let's kind of recreate the financial statements based off of the bank statements and the credit card statements, looking at cash in, cash out, and then make those normalizing adjustments, as well as assessing kind of revenue analysis, because a tax return only shows you, hey, revenue is 2.1 million. And when you're doing a quality of earnings, you could dig into all customer concentration, more granular, because you have the bank statements, you have the general ledgers, and you could see where revenue is coming from. And so you could get a more accurate depiction of where revenue is coming from. You could also dig into your big vendors from an expense management standpoint. And so instead of relying on the word of the broker or the seller, you're now you're going a couple layers deeper and assessing the viability and the expenses, the margins, the revenue of the company, and kind of creating not new financials, because you're still relying on what's kind of flowing through the bank accounts, but you're looking at financials in a different sense. And where we're seeing it more often than not is with accrual financials, because the average tax return is on a cash basis. Whereas company prepared, if you could get accrual financials, that is a better depiction of how the company is actually operating from a financial health perspective today. And so if most quality of earnings are relying on accrual financials to arrive at kind of what your adjusted EBITDA is on an annual basis for 24, 23, 22. And a lot of banks are getting these quality of earnings, looking at these quality of earnings, and they're like, why is there a difference between the quality of earnings and our tax returns? And so it's always fun on our end from a business valuation side, because it's like, what do we rely upon? Do we rely upon the tax returns or the quality of earnings? And it ultimately comes down to who's preparing it. Because when it's a tax return, there is a legal obligation from the preparer standpoint to make sure it's as accurate as possible. Granted, we all know sketchy CPAs and EAs that don't abide by that code of ethics. Whereas quality of earnings, it's you don't necessarily know the reputation or the level of ethics or standards that are needed to produce the right quality work. Because I love it when we get a quality of earnings and there's 5 different scenarios of EBITDA, and you're like, which one's right?
Right.
And we just
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Yeah. So that's kind of like a snippet of quality of earnings. But I would love to hear what you two have seen and are experiencing, because it's every lender has vastly different experiences with QoEs and QoE providers.
So for me, again, I do a lot of business business acquisitions, and we're starting to see that. And Angel in the comments just made a comment. They're starting to see a lot of those in smaller deal size, under 2 million. And I am too. It's definitely something that I'm starting to see, because we really actually do kind of focus in that under $3 million space. And it makes us feel a lot more comfortable with it, as well as, especially when it comes to, again, the type of business. Are you going to do that on a restaurant? Probably not. Something that manufactures something, that's a really important one. We have a couple of those in our pipeline right now that, where the quality of earnings is really something we're looking at. So it's good.
And Ryan, I mean, I'm definitely a big fan of business valuations. Absolutely. But you know what I really, really, really want you to kind of speak on, only because I think it's very important for our borrowers out there. Many borrowers don't realize why a business valuation is so darn important. They don't want to pay the money up front. They think it's a waste. They think this. They think that they can just take what they see or what they're given, whether it be by the broker or the seller, as truth. Tell them what some of the things are, because think about it. Even in the price and the negotiation of the price of these businesses and whatnot, the business valuation helps with that. But what are some really good points that you would like to tell our borrowers out there, right, of why it makes sense and why spending a little bit up front actually is creating a heck of a lot more down the road?
Oh, great question, Tanya. Really, it all comes down to, so we are all familiar with rule of thumbs and looking at multiples from private transactions and using that as some sort of logical basis of what you as a buyer should be buying this business at. And ultimately, I have this conversation 30 to 40 times a week with people calling in to Peak. But it comes down to a multiple is a representation of risk return reward associated with that particular company's cash flow. And so when you look at deal stats or peer comps, you look at a particular NAICS code and you see that multiples are kind of all across the board. And it's because of there are some companies that are more risky than others. And if you just stick with an average multiple, you are kind of being misled. And so what is fun about business valuation is there's a lot of overlap with quality of earnings when it comes to risk assessment. And same with underwriting. That's why SBA business valuations is fun, because you're getting the risk assessment and the commentary narrative from the bank. You're getting the commentary narrative from the broker, the seller, the buyer, a quality of earnings. And then it's time for us to kind of dig through and assess risk as well. And so you're taking all these tidbits and assessing, okay, like everyone has said this about management. Like, are they actually accurate? Or customer concentration, like who owns that relationship? Is it the manager, the owner, or the business? And so once we figure out our financial due diligence, we go through that risk assessment, and that completely kind of runs through all the different valuation approaches, and it influences what multiples we look at that are applicable. It also is utilized within our income approach, which is very much company specific. We're looking at this risk assessment and looking at the company's cash flow to assess what is the viability and what is the actual value of the company, and then comparing that to these external multiples that are used in relation to like the company's cash flow and revenue to see, okay, what are we seeing between these two stories, and kind of conclude to an overall value. So when we're working with buyers of businesses, business valuation is a fun element. Granted, there is a cost associated with it, but kind of like a QoE, you're seeing, okay, is what's being presented from a financial perspective accurate? A business valuation basically goes a step further. Like, these financials are accurate, but are they telling the right story on what you should be transacting at when you factor in that risk? And so that's why you see a lot of differences between sometimes asking prices of brokers and where we come in at, or any valuation firm, is because the broker has more incentive to sell it for the highest price possible.
No way.
And everyone falls back on, well, the value of a business is what two willing parties transact at. And it's like, yes, that's true, but it has to be a win-win for buyer and seller. And the return on investment has to be worthwhile from a buyer's perspective to make it as such that if they do get an SBA loan and it incur principal and interest payments, that they're not just working a job, that they're making an investment on their money. And so like I bought a business back in 2021. We bought a plumbing company, and like our projections, everything was like up and up and up. And then 2022 occurred and we went like, and then we're back on a positive trajectory and doing well. But like, it's understanding, like, if you don't bake in a higher risk and a lower purchase price, you can't factor in the unknowns that are going to occur no matter what, because you really don't know a business until you own it.
Well, and there it is. You really don't know a business until you own it. That's awesome.
And again, just how Ryan walked through this in layman's terms for everyone. This is why you work with Ryan. And Ryan is not a sponsor of the podcast.
Nope.
Tanya and I definitely both use him, and I know a lot of people that do. But please check out Ryan at Peak Business Valuation. This is the kind of person you need on your side when doing business acquisitions. So,
and look at that smile!
I know, right?
Oh, I try. So I have sunburn from spring break last week.
Oh, gotcha. Well, thanks again for being with us, Ryan. We sure appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Of course, we loved having you on here. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Don't forget that we are right here on Tuesday mornings on LinkedIn and YouTube or any of the streaming platforms where you get your podcasts. Go check us out, any of our latest episodes, I guess. And while you're there, look at the Art of SBA Lending as well as BDO show.
BDO show.
You know what? You're going to get different things from all of us. Anyway, right. we love to connect. We want to connect with you. Reach out to Paul or I on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. Other than that, oh my gosh, come on, guys. Rise up with your big bad selves. And if nobody's told you, we think you're pretty dadgum awesome. We'll see you next week. See ya.
See you later.
Bye, guys.